Welcome to the Fly Culture Podcast, bringing you interviews, reviews and fishing tips. Here's your host, Pete Tigus.
Hey everyone, this is the Fly Culture Podcast. I first met my guest several years ago when I saw a post he made on a fishing forum and asked him if he'd be interested in writing a piece for the online magazine I ran at the time. Our paths crossed while he and his wife Rebecca were cycling from Ireland to Finland. He has been a contributor to Fly Culture and was recently published in the Drake too. I spent time with him in Italy last year and found when he has something to say, it is worth listening to. He is a skilled and thoughtful angler. I'd like to welcome Johannes Bulfin to the podcast. JB, it's great to have you along on the podcast today. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm good, Pete. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you along, and I know we've got so much to talk about, but now obviously the season's underway, and I know for myself that it's been not a challenging one, but it's been one that I've had to adapt to because the water's been so high. So trout have been kind of more on the back burner and salmon have been at the front for me. But how has your season shaped up so far, and what have you been up to?
Yeah, we're not too far geographically apart anymore. I'm over in Ireland and you're in England, but we kind of got off to a really fantastic start with pike on the fly. February already, the rivers were really low and kind of summer levels, and I got out and the fishing was incredible before the spawn. Lots of nice fish. And then the trout season opened and I kept fishing for pike. So 1st of March, which was so good. And then the rain came and blew everything out, and it's been raining for about a month, and everything is just, like you said, quite tough at the moment. And so I've been more towards the trout recently, up in the real headwaters and just trying to scratch out a few fish. And I did go after pike once, and I caught a pike in about 3 foot of water where cattle should have been grazing. So it was it was interesting. But I mean, like you said, the hatches are going to start coming off now and should make things a bit easier as things warm up, even though we had 5 days of good weather, and I was thinking, yes, the river's going to come down, and now the rain is rattling off the roof again this morning. It's just the way it is.
Yeah, and how do you reconcile that? Because I kind of, I talk to fishing friends throughout the week, really, and we're saying, right, okay, it's going to come right, and then it doesn't. Do you deal with that okay when, I'm immediately, and it's part the old guide in me as well, that when the rain's falling, I'm thinking, oh, God, we're not going to be able to fish. How am I going to fit? How do you deal with that process because fishing's really important, and I'm sure people listening to us for many reasons, but that ability to get out onto the river is key for us, isn't it? And do you sort of deal with that relatively well, or do you, like you were saying, do you head up the system and say, right, I'm going to try and find somewhere that may well be fishable?
Yeah, I think for me it's definitely move to where you can fish. I'm really lucky in that there's the Slieve Blue Mountains, or I can see them if it wasn't raining out the window, and so you can go as high up the system as you want, and then in the other direction, the Shannon is only a 10-minute drive away, which is a massive river, and as low as you can go, kind of geographically. So within a half an hour drive of each other, you can. So it's basically up to you to find where the fishable water is. And definitely the first outing after trout this year was early March, and I went too low, and then I went too high. But I then kind of hit a spot in the middle where I caught a few fish, and was, I think it's really up to the angler, at least here, to find the fishable water. And usually I can't use the excuse that the weather was off.
No, that sounds a very fair comment. And interestingly, are you looking early on for hatches? We don't really we get the hatch of large dark olives, but we don't get the fish rising to them, or very, very rarely anyway, certainly on the river that I fish. Are you looking for the hatches, or are you fishing in a different way for those fish to try and find them?
Usually this time of year for me anyway, it would be nymph fishing. So a lot of Euro style French nymphing. Just because, well, I like to catch fish, and you're playing the percentages. If 1% of fish are rising, and then you have to still get everything right, you don't get too many shots. I mean, every time I've been out, there have been a couple of fish rising, and you could target them, of course, and probably a gentleman like yourself would. But I'm a bit of I like to catch fish, so I'll mainly Euro nymph this early on in the season. Even though now there should be more fly life, but the rivers are so high that it's a bit difficult at the moment.
Yeah, I don't know where you got gentleman from anyway, but I'll take that one and store that away somewhere or other. And also, I was thinking and knowing you that streamers are part of your armory as well, and one that you enjoy. And is that something that you're looking to employ early season too?
Absolutely, and that's something I picked up in Finland. It's not something I'd used ever before in Ireland, and I'm really, really looking forward to trying to incorporate that into the fishing here. And I've been thinking about it a lot, and why early season streamer fishing in Finland is so good. And it's all to do with the runs of bait fish that come into the rapids. So it's not necessarily given that the streamer fishing here will be good, because there's not those massive shoals of bait fish coming into very compact, short stretches of river between lakes, which draw then massive trout into those areas. But I still think that streamer fishing should work here. And I was out once trying it one evening, some deep pools where I know there's some big fish, and I ended up blanking for the first time in a very long time. And also ended up, it was very windy. I also ended up hooking myself above my left eyebrow on a cast, and was very thankful for using barbless hooks. So I had a couple of hits. No, they didn't feel like big fish, and I had a pike on as well, which also got off. But it's definitely, streamer fishing is something I'm looking to use, and there's not really how would you say, a sort of a guide book here as to how it's done, because people don't seem to use it very much. Definitely not in this area anyway.
Interesting. And you said about hooking yourself, and that makes me think possibly that you were fishing a heavy fly. Does that mean your approach would be floating line, whatever it is, leader, and a heavy streamer?
In this case it was, yeah, absolutely, tungsten bead and all. But in Finland they wouldn't really use weighted flies. They'd very much believe that if the trout is hunting, he's going to come up to the surface to take that fly. And they'll even use foam back flies, something similar to a gurgler, to really keep the fly on the surface and create disturbance and fish in that way. So yes, I was using a very heavy streamer just to try and get the fly down in front of whatever fish might have been there, because they weren't actively hunting, obviously. Yeah.
That's the interesting point about them as well, isn't it? That the streamers, and you said you thought they were smaller fish hitting that, and that does say a lot about the species and how aggressive that they can be. And when I've streamer fished, I've been amazed by the size of the fish. And what I say by that, I've caught my biggest fish, hardly surprisingly, but also some of the smallest fish as well, and how they will chase down and hunt a streamer. That's quite an amazing. Did you find that in Finland as well, that the size of the fish was extraordinary given the size of the fly that you're actually fishing too.
Yes and no, because you're using a big streamer, but you're also expecting a big fish because the big fish are there and they are hunting the size of bait fish that you're using. Occasionally, you will get very, very small fish hitting the fly as well, but mainly it's actually quite big fish there. I mean, here in Ireland, I was always surprised when I used to do as a teenager a lot of spin fishing for trout, how small a fish will hit, that size of a rapala or meps or whatever. So yes and no.
Yeah, I think the reason I love it so much is probably the hit. And I wondered if that translated also to your love of pike fishing. Is that a similar sort of thing? And which came first? Was it streamers and trout, or I guess streamers and pike? Were they aligned, and are there any crossovers between the two that you can that you've uncovered since you've been doing it so long?
Streamers and pike definitely came first. That was. I'm trying to remember what was the first. I think I remember the first time. I'm not sure, but I remember one time anyway. I was at a stock trout fishery, and it was just really slow, and I think I was pulling a woolly bugger or something, and then I got a hit right in a place where a trout shouldn't be, and I landed a small pike, and then I think I had a kinked up old spinning trace or something in the bottom of the bag, and I put that on, and the flashiest trout fly I had, and just started fishing the margins, and I remember catching 7 pike at least, all small jacks, but just like you said, the hit was they just crashed the fly so aggressively, and they can fight pretty hard too, depending on the water temperature. So yeah, that was just a kind of moment of epiphany, and then went out and bought a bike rod, bought the gear, and I used in the beginning I'd only use a silver fly or a white fly or something like that, so I could track it through the water, and you'd just be gives me shivers even now, just thinking about it, because they hit it so hard. And occasionally you'll get one take where you're watching the fly and suddenly it's just gone, and you didn't feel anything, and a pike is just kind of inhaled around it. But then all of a sudden, where the fly was, you're looking at the head of this usually quite big fish, and that's just terrifying as well.
Yeah. That's one of the best descriptions I think of, and certainly if you're fishing those flies that you can see in the water as well, the description of the lights going out, I think, is perfect when that fish hits it, and like you say, the fly that was in front of you suddenly disappears again. That's pretty thrilling, and similarly with trout as well. When those sorts of things happen as well, I find deeply interesting and exciting. And coming back to trout for a little bit, what have you learned? What advice would you give somebody who's looking to try streamers? Say there's not much going on, and it's a good way to prospect the water as well. But what advice would you give to somebody? How do you approach? Are you down and across and a few tweaks? Are you squarer and fast? How do you fish your fly once you've made that cast out?
I think the best piece of advice would be don't fish in just one way. Don't just fish down and across. Fish a little bit upstream, do an upstream mend so it sinks down, and then retrieve that back, cast a little upstream, do a downstream mend so it skates a bit closer to the surface. Dangle the fly in behind rocks. Try a bit of everything. One of the most effective ways with those foam back flies was to really just kind of so you cast across and a little upstream and throw a big downstream end so that it flies across the surface. That was in those circumstances with a lot of bait fish in the rapids. It was really quite something, and a lot of it's maybe not for the best advice for UK anglers, but sometimes using a very visible fly up near the surface will generate a take, and then you kind of know where the fish is, and then even if you don't hook him, you can go back with a sunk fly and try there. And I say maybe not for UK anglers because that's again with masses of bait fish in the rapids, and the fish are feeding, so you're kind of looking to locate a big trout. But just for trying for the first time, just do it. Use a woolly bugger with maybe a copper bead to begin with, or a tungsten bead to get it down a bit more, and you'll be surprised what and try those different. I mean, I think the water has to have a bit of flow, or it helps. It gives the fly more life. But then it is the most effective way for fishing a really slow, deep pool as well. And in those cases, strip the fly and use the rod tip and just put life into the fly because there's not so much current.
Yeah, nice. Good advice. You said you were Euronymphing. How about Euronymphing streamers then? Because I know a little bit of that goes on, and there was a bit of chatter about it the last few years, but I don't see so much. But is that something that you've played with a little bit as well, and put something a little bit more Larry on the end of your Euronymph leader?
Yeah, absolutely. It's like amalgamating two of the dark arts, I guess. It's it suits me definitely. The biggest fish I caught last year was on a Euronymphed, I think it was a gold tinsel streamer with big heavy 3.5-4 millimeter tungsten bead on it, and it was an incredible fish. I think it was 65 centimeters. So I think 60 centimeters is 24 inches. So another inch or two on top of that. So it was, and he regurgitated, I think, 3 roach as I was playing him. So they're definitely feeding on those. But yeah, it's I mean, you're so in touch with the fly that you feel everything. And this particular rapids was very clear water as well, so I saw the fish turn, and I thought it was a pike. I was sure it was a pike. It was so big, and it turned out to be a trout. But it's hard to call it fly fishing, I'll be honest. You are using mainly just the monofilament line, heavy monofilament line, and then a tippet, which should also be strong. And you're just slinging the fly a relatively short distance upstream and keeping in touch with it. Usually just dead drifting. Usually you're, like Euronymphing, just fishing upstream and in behind pockets. And I enjoy it, but I'll understand if other people don't.
Fair comment. It's interesting you said about dead drifting as well, which obviously makes sense as well. And I from what you've previously just said as well, that mixing up a more traditional way of fishing streamers. But have you had success, and I'm sure you've tried it, but because it seems to me that you could really impart some great movement by jigging and just gently moving the rod tip to jig that streamer and get the tail moving and everything else. Do you try that, and does it work for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I if I'm actively moving the streamer, I'm always working the rod tip, definitely. I very, very rarely just strip or just figure of 8 retrieve or something like that. The only exception to that would be if I am dead drifting, say, those foam back streamers. So I'm just actually fishing it like a dry fly, just casting upstream and letting it come down. You'd be surprised how casually a big trout will come up and take that, because I guess he sees it as a dead fish just floating down, and he's not expecting it to dart off or anything. He's just coming up and taking that like a fly.
Yeah, I like the sound of that. That sounds really, really interesting to me, and I might try that. I thought when you said phone backs as well, and I was thinking of Finland, I wondered if rodents, and then, of course, my mind's moving on to New Zealand, and I wondered if things like that would happen over there. Did you see any evidence of that? Would there, and you think these big trout are perfectly capable of eating a mouse as well, aren't they?
Absolutely, yeah. It's. I mean, these flies are tied to imitate just fish. Probably some people have tried mouse patterns as well, but the consensus that I've heard back is that they haven't been any more successful than the fly is actually called a surfboard. A surfboard is the name of the fly. So you can. I'm not sure what you'd find on YouTube if you Google that, but basically it's just a tinsel streamer tied with a big piece of foam on the back. Usually white on the visible side to the angler, so you can kind of keep an eye on it in the currents. Usually, if you get a take, you're going to see the fish anyway. So no, I've never actually fished mouse patterns. Although here it could be even a more successful way, because I haven't come across those massive shoals of bait fish. Our river systems here are much longer, and they're not concentrated into those kind of areas like they were in Finland between lakes. So,
yeah, nice. Already, listeners, I'm sure you're getting a sense of Johannes as a thinking angler, and how he approaches it, and slightly where I applaud out in left field a little bit as well. So I really like that. And I wanted to move on a little bit and say that your background is freshwater and marine biology, and you've lived and fished in a number of places, and you settled back, as you say, back in Ireland. And I wonder what you felt on your return, how things looked, and how comparable to some of the places that you've been. Let's use Finland as an example, and the state of the rivers in comparison, not just from a fishing, but from clarity, from cleanliness and everything else. How do they compare?
It's a good question. I've thought about it a lot, like not even consciously or meaning to think about it, but you automatically just compare places. So, I mean, one of the reasons we moved back as a family to Ireland was just to get access to easy fishing, or more easy access to fishing, I should say. Fishing isn't necessarily easy. And that's why I just love this area. There's so many little trout streams, and the access is under one permit, so you pay a yearly license, and you have, I don't know how many rivers, maybe at least 12, maybe up to 20, and lakes, and there's a lot of fishing, and I can just jump in the car and head off for an hour, fish the river for an hour, and come back home. Whereas in Finland, I'd have to set aside a day, and if you wanted to get to the really good, where these 24-inch trout are, you had to be booking last year to get this year, and it was a pain, really. And you had to be on the phone ringing, trying to get permits, and then you get the permits, and then you're trying to arrange time off. And with a family, that wasn't easy. So I just basically would lie awake at night thinking about Ireland, and little clear streams here, and casting a fly, and then of course the pike fishing on the Shannon is on another scale. But I must say I was very surprised. It could be to do with COVID as well, when people weren't out so much, but how neglected the rivers are here. There's so little traffic on the river banks. They're all really overgrown, and that's, somebody will say, "You lucky bastard." That's amazing. You get the whole river to yourself. But I don't quite see it like that. I'd prefer to see a lot of prefer to see more people out there enjoying it, and because then when issues do arise, you have a bit of support, and there's strength in numbers and all that. But I found, so I've had conflicting emotions about it. I enjoy fishing on my own. I'm not going to lie. I do. I love just getting that headspace. And in Finland, that wasn't something that you got, because the fishing is concentrated into rapids, and then the access to those rapids, you buy a day permit for it. And sometimes there's a quota on how many people can fish there, especially on the really famous ones. So you are going to be fishing with other people, and it's really strange for me to say that I enjoy fishing on my own. But then I got the exact opposite of that through the competition fishing, where then you take it to the complete opposite extreme. And you're not just fishing with people, you make it incredibly competitive. But yeah, kind of back to the original question, it's the rivers in Ireland. I'm a little bit afraid for them with how few people, at least in my area, right here in the Midlands of Ireland, are actually out fishing. And those who are fishing, they walk maybe 100 yards from the bridge up and downstream, and then the path just ends. And people aren't bothered fishing any further, and it's good for me for now, but it's not good for the long run.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because that's sort of against a lot of what I'd heard about COVID and people's ability to get out. And people I've spoken to in the US on this podcast about it said how the rivers got busier. I've talked to rod manufacturers in the US. I think with Zoe on a recent podcast, we were saying about people getting out up onto Dartmoor. They may not be fishing, but they were getting out into, and that's sort of the first sort of comment I've seen the other way, which is sad to hear. And do you think the demographic, I was going to ask this question a little bit later, do you think the demographic where you live is older than what you were experiencing in Finland? Has that got something to do with it? And does that mean that there's not so many people or younger people coming out and fishing then?
I think that could be one of the main reasons, yeah. I mean, the lockdown here was extreme. It was, people weren't going to the rivers because most people lived more than 5 kilometers away from a river, and you weren't allowed to go to them. So I think that explains the lack of people on the rivers in that sense. And then I have seen, evidence that people have been in some places and unfortunately left campsites and stuff in the woods, and I don't know, another kind of despairing moment there. Now I'm trying to think what your question was. Sorry, Pete, I went off on a tangent there. What was the?
Oh no, that's, you carry on, tangent away there. It was just about the age demographic where you're living and fishing. Do you think that is older than where you are in where you were? Sorry, in Finland.
It is, absolutely, yeah. That could be the reason why the older folk weren't out as well during COVID. It does seem to be a lot older here. Unfortunately, I mean, I think I've said it to you before in discussions that it's quite a popular sport in Finland. It's quite cool. A lot of young guys, late teens, early 20s, right up to their 40s. And it's quite social as well, just because the way the fishing is structured there. Like I said, you're going to be fishing with other people, so you're going to be leaning against the bridge, talking to other anglers and sharing ideas, and that is nice. It is nice. Whereas here, I'm sure there's fantastic. There is fantastic fishing scenes, say over on the Western Lakes, and a lot of. I'm sure it would feel a lot more alive there. I'm kind of in the. I don't know. It's people make fun of this part of Ireland, right in the middle. That it's kind of the most uninteresting and boring part of the country, and they're probably right. But there is fishing here, and people should enjoy it, and people should get out and catch trout. I mean, the trout aren't any less beautiful, even if our landscape is a little bit less rugged than the Western Lakes, so on and so forth.
I think I'd use the term untapped gem then on that basis.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So let's move on a little bit, because we're going to spin it round the other way. And when you moved from Ireland to Finland, you and Rebecca embarked on a mammoth trip to, I guess, explore and see the country. And you cycled from Ireland to Finland. And I wanted to ask how that actually was. How long did it take? And I know you got some fishing in because we met up and fished, and we'll talk about that. But did you get some fishing in elsewhere as well along the way?
A little bit. In France, especially, along the Loire. We were traveling along that for maybe a week, maybe more. And yeah, it was kind of easy to buy a permit there. And then wherever we camped along the river, just head out in the evenings and take a few casts. And yeah, I found chub, which was a fantastic fish. Really, really, really nice on the fly, and they made me very happy fishing wise along that trip. So that was nice.
Nice, and we caught some grayling as well. I remember that it was one of those wonderful days fishing that I remember picking you and Rebecca up, and then you said, "I've bumped into this fly angler," and it turned out it was Duncan, somebody I knew quite well as well. So he joined us, and we had a great day's fishing, and we managed to pop your grayling cherry as well, didn't we?
Yeah, that was right at the death. I was. I've thought about that big one that I lost quite a few times, and I guess at that moment I didn't realize how. I just assumed, oh well, there'll be another big one around the next corner. It's not so. it's not a big deal, and then it turned out to be incredibly difficult to catch a grayling, but we did get one in the end.
Yeah. Do you know what? I didn't even remember that you'd actually lost it. I remember standing on the bank, and I remember spotting it, and I remember all those. I've either erased it from my memory, or it just didn't even. I couldn't remember that it had even taken the fly. So I'm thrilled that one was on, and that was a really nice one. And I know I wrote a piece about it in Eat, Sleep, Fish afterwards, and standing up. I remember that moment. I can remember the pool, and I remember actually I had to, for Mike Weaver for trout and salmon. Actually, I had to catch a big grayling on order for him, and it was from that beat a little bit further downstream. And the cry, Mike had gone, and I use inverted commas for a sit down. I think he was asleep, because when I started screeching when I'd hooked into a rather nice fish, that he didn't arrive, and I managed to net it, and we got some photos and things like that. And that was really exciting. But that was a fun part of it. And it was lovely to meet Rebecca as well. And I remember us doing some casting with her, and she did some fishing too. And I can't remember, was that the first time she'd picked up a fly rod?
Not quite. No, she had before, but might have been the first time, one of the first times that she caught fish. Anyway, she'll probably set me straight on that now when she hears this. But one of the first times, anyway.
Yeah, fantastic. And so this was an epic journey. How long did it take, and what was the feeling like when you'd actually finished it? Because I don't know if it's something like a marathon, or if it's like a big sporting event, and once it's over and finished, you're sort of, well, what do I do next, sort of thing, or was life so busy that you had to settle into your new accommodation, obviously check out new fishing, work, and everything else that went with it? Did you not get a chance to reflect on that? But that was a pretty cool journey, wasn't it?
Yeah, I was, I think, a month and a half. We cycled. We set off from Ireland and crossed to Wales and down through England to France, down France a bit, across France, and then up the Rhine through Germany, Holland, and then across a bit of Germany again. And we got a boat from I think it was Lübeck in Germany to Helsinki then. The intention was to cycle via land all the way, but by the October, I think it was mid-October at that stage, and you're moving north at that time, and the rain, I think it was, the 6th straight day of rain or something, and you're kind of like, okay, we can stop now. This isn't so much fun anymore. But we covered, how much did we cover? I think it was 2,000 kilometers, and to be honest, we didn't have time really to reflect on that trip so much. It was straight into probably the bleakest time of year in Finland, and just trying to find your feet. And there wasn't much backslapping or anything going on there. That was just, life moves on, and here we are now.
Nicely put. And so did that mean that you spent time to fill in some of that, to focus on the fishing? I know we've talked, and I was going to ask you what you learned from your experience living there from a fishing perspective. Was there anything else that you took from your time fishing there that has stayed with you ever since and will continue to?
Yeah, I mean, the competition scene taught me probably a decade's worth of, maybe more, of floundering around on your own. I mean, nobody enjoys losing, but getting your ass kicked a few times will teach you pretty quickly what to do differently the next time. And really, really enjoyable characters in the competition scene in Finland, and it's relatively small, so you get to meet the same people over and over again, and you develop friendships and get to know personalities. And I mean, the first competition I went to was just in the middle of everything, and I went with 2 rods and a handful of flies, and I just rocked up at the river, and then a couple of guys looked at my setup and they were like, oh dear. And they had a whip around of all the competitors and got me a box full of flies. And then some of them gave me advice as to how to fish. And one guy said, basically, just dangle the fly behind every likely looking rock and you'll do fine. And so I did that for 2 days, and I ended up finishing 3rd in my very first competition with and it was all downhill from there. But nobody was too keen to help me after that. But no, they're really, really great characters and a lot of fun. And the competition fishing, really, when we had children and life got incredibly hectic, there were 6-7 days in the year that you could lock in and say, I'm going fishing on these days. And that was something I needed, even if it was competition angling, which can be painful at times. But you get the occasional success, and that keeps you going. So
nice. Yeah, that's they probably thought you were some sort of ringer turning up, and there wasn't a book being run or something, was there?
No.
Johannes Bulfin each way, please. Yeah. One of the things I wanted to ask you, I was thinking what you said at the beginning, when you said you like to catch fish, and you talked about the competition scene. Do you think there is, because one of the reasons I fish was because for me, and it's only my experience, this isn't in any way sort of, and fishing I always describe as a microcosm of life anyway. So we're all different in our approach to it and what it means to us. But, what you were saying about competition, liking to catch fish, do you think those things are aligned? And does that make you lean more towards the competition scene? And I get that you were partly motivated by wanting to learn how to fish the waters there, but do you think consciously or either subconsciously that was a feature of why you went down that particular route?
Probably, yeah. I mean, consciously the reasons were to meet people in the angling scene, get to know fishing places where the competitions were held. But then the fantastic part of competition fishing is that if you catch, you could be fishing for, say it's an all species competition and the bottom or the minimum size is 20 centimeters and you catch a 20 centimeter roach on the fly. In normal circumstances, you're kind of just shaking them off and, taking the next cast. Whereas in a competition, you hook a fish above the minimum size and your heart just starts pounding and the adrenaline is flowing and you could it just takes it out and you're shaking after a fish that normally wouldn't do that to you. So that was incredibly appealing. It basically, competition angling amps up the successes, no matter how minor they are. So a fish like that, but then also the lows, like if you go out on your own and you get blanked, say it happens every once in a while, and nobody saw it, everything's fine. But at a competition, it's written down in paper, Bulfin caught 0 fish, and it's put up on the internet, and everybody can see that. So it's so you're kind of looking around, geez, who else caught 0 fish, But so those emotions are really, really amped up in that, and it's good and it's bad. So it's certainly if life feels dull, it brought massive adrenaline spikes into the fishing. And I think after a few seasons I did I got frustrated that my fishing was that it was only competition fishing. So then I took a break for a couple of seasons, and I think I actually enjoyed those seasons, especially the first one after it, more, because I basically did the same thing. I just looked, when is there competition on that weekend? Okay, so last year I took that weekend off to go to that competition. This year I'm taking that weekend off to go fish on my own somewhere else, and I had some really nice successes, and that was good. I needed that as well. So it's I sound like I'm contradicting myself the whole time here, but that's probably human nature, and we have one thing, we want another, and vice versa. So
yeah, nice. I think what you did was learn from that and used it in a different way as well. So I think that's all cool as far as I'm concerned, I have to say. And you also, am I right in thinking that you did some guide school while you were over there?
A short stint I did, yes. I was kind of immediately when we moved over, and I was scratching around for jobs and stuff, and I came across this guide school thing and started that, and unfortunately didn't finish because then life got in the way, and a full-time job that wasn't absolutely terrible came up, and I had a kid on the way already at that stage, and I had to kind of prioritize what was important at that time. And yeah, I mean, honestly, a little bit of me regrets not completing it anyway through everything. But I still think it was probably it was the logical, if boring, decision. So
No, that's exactly the right one. And with family and everything else, that's just what you got to do. I think the guiding fraternity would be richer for having you in it. So perhaps, one day it may happen, it may not. But if it does, I think that's good for guiding to have you in it. I wanted to move on as well, because we were messaging just the other day that you were out in Denmark sea trouting. And I was sort of having a three-way conversation with yourself and my good friend Ray as well, that you were fishing a spot that, funnily enough, I did the podcast with him from as well. And it's lovely to hear that we do share that love of Baltic sea trouting. I say it on here many times, it's just fabulous fun. I know you feel likewise. What is the appeal of it for you?
I think it's just the right balance of difficulty and reward. If fishing is too easy, it's not fun. If it's too hard, it's not fun. I think in sea trouting, at least when you go to Denmark or Gotland or some of these where there is a healthy population of fish, you get the reward often enough to keep you interested. Whereas sea trout fishing in Finland was mainly misery, just casting and casting, and there maybe I had a few minor successes there as well. But I don't know. I think I've thought about it, of course, and I think it's almost unbelievable that you can, wade out into the sea, cast a fly, which is, obviously covers a shorter distance than lobbing a spoon or whatever, 100 yards, and you can catch a fish. It's hard to believe, and I think that keeps me going back to it. I mean, I haven't done as much of it as I would like, but I have been thinking there has to be the same kind of fishing here in Ireland as well, on the coast, and it's definitely something I want to explore because it would be easier to access and I could do it more often. So it's definitely something I'm going to explore, and I'm almost certain that it could be even good fishing here. So we'll see. Time will tell.
Lovely. Keep me posted with that one. I'd be fascinated to hear that. And a shout out to Tim as well, who's contributor as well, friend of the podcast and magazine. And he has caught one round here in the UK somewhere or other as well. I'm not going to divulge just in case I shouldn't do, but I wanted to shout him out for doing that as well. So he's out similar to yourself, doing stuff a little bit outside the envelope as well, and I applaud that as well. Let's move on to Italy a little bit as well, because that was just such a memorable trip for so many reasons as well. How did you find that? And obviously yourself and Rebecca came along, and that was probably a high-risk strategy. She's not sort of a hardcore angler, really, is she? And I guess it was slightly high risk for you, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely sets the guides in a bit of a kind of difficult situation where one is like completely fanatical, and I expected Rebecca to be more interested in the cuisine and the sunshine, but she really surprised me. It was fantastic to see how much she actually enjoyed, the casting and the catching. She did surprisingly well, and it was high risk, I suppose, because I mean, we had a lovely holiday. I mean, it was going to be good one way or another, I guess. Even if she didn't enjoy the fishing, I knew she was going to enjoy the place and the scenery, and the fact that she enjoyed the fishing so much was amazing, and really, really just made it for me.
Yeah, and me as well. That was one of the highlights for me, seeing her come in and tell us about the trout, and I think she caught some grayling as well, which was really, really thrilling. And I was really, really pleased that it went smoothly for yourself, and she enjoyed it so much as well. So it was fabulous from that point of view. For me, I don't know what your takeaway from it was, but for me, it was pocket water heaven. It really was. What did you take away from there?
Oh man, the dry fly fishing in I mean, there's so many different currents in those areas. I really put my casting to shame. But just just how willing the fish were to come up for a dry fly if it was drifted correctly. I mean, the difference between a drag-free drift and a drift that was dragging was a fish every time. It was hard. It was hard to believe how like the guide said, instant feedback. They let you know, did you do it well, and then of course the scenery of that place was just, man, that high mountain meadow was just unforgettable. The water's turquoise, and there's all the currents that a trout angler wants to see. There's riffles, and there's pocket water, and there's kind of a smooth glide out the back before it all starts again. And man, what can you say? And the mountains around it just blow you away, really.
Yeah, I knew you got the bit between your teeth when we'd had lunch, when we were fishing that high alpine lake, and you were just transfixed in the walk into the lake with the stream that came out of it. And then I think you managed to scramble down somehow and fish that stream coming out the lake. And that you had a pretty memorable session then as well, didn't you?
Yeah. There's fish in every pocket. I didn't catch fish in every pocket, but there were fish in every pocket.
Yeah, that was, I remember that very, very well, and that was super civilized. I wanted to talk about your writing as well. You've written for Eat, Sleep, Fish, you've written for Fly Culture, and I was absolutely thrilled when you messaged me and said that you'd had a piece accepted and has subsequently been published in the Drake. Writing is an important thing for you as well, isn't it, alongside fishing? But you sort of write, and I hear from you, you've written a piece about Italy that we'll put in at some stage. You're in the Current magazine as well, about a beautiful piece you write about leaving Finland to move to Ireland and your home river. Is that a way of expressing your passion and love creatively for our pastime?
It is, definitely. It is that. But even more than that, it's just something for myself. Sometimes I feel I need to write. Sometimes I feel I need to write more than I need to go fishing, which is, I don't know how to put that into words, but it just, that's the way it feels. And the writing's been a real slow burner to say the least. I haven't done much with it just because of time, but it is something I really enjoy, and definitely intend to keep doing.
And do you find that process for you, is it one, knowing you as I do, I may know the answer to this, but I'm going to let you answer it anyway. But do you find when something simmers away, do you put pen to paper and it flows quickly, or do you keep coming back to it and refining it? How is that process for you?
Yeah, I found quite a specific process has actually developed. I'll have an idea, or something will happen that I thought this might be worth building something, an article or a piece around, and then I'll just be jotting stuff down on a notepad, or even recording a voice note on the phone when something that I think is worth recording comes up. Then at some stage, I'll just mash it all onto a page in kind of like a spider diagram or whatever, and all the components will be there. Then I'll write it down with a pen or pencil onto physical paper, and I'll leave big gaps between each sentence. And so I'll write one sentence and there'll be 2 sentence space, and then I'll write the next one. And that's just to change each word 10 times. And then I'll write it out in roughly how I want it to be or what I want to say, and I won't worry too much about anything, and it's just kind of vomited out onto the page. And I'll leave that then for it could be a week, it could be a year, it could be any amount of time. And I'll come back at some stage and I'll read it. And if I still like it, then and if I still think it's worthy, then I'll start editing it and type it up on the computer and so on and so forth. And if it's not, then I just leave it as it was and don't think about that any further. And so sometimes I'll take elements out of something I've written and ditched and take them into something else. And that was how the Drake article actually, that was kind of originally it was 2 ideas. I'm not sure if you've read it, but the one was my fishing friend and the contrast between having a family and not, and fishing all the time. And then the other was the tomato plants growing out on the balcony. But then they kind of actually, they came together. So that's kind of the process. But yeah, I do think a lot about what I'm trying to say. And sometimes the worst thing is if I see something in print that I've written and I don't like it when it's there, and it's like, oh, I want to change that. That didn't go right. And so now I've tried to pause a little longer before saying, okay, this is done. So maybe I'll never get anything published again with that tactic, but we'll see.
It might lend itself to a book rather well.
Maybe.
It's a fascinating one, isn't it, that you say about that process, and it was the process I was expecting, you being a biologist and everything else, that it would be well thought out, whereas I tend to vomit the words out. And actually I was writing a creative piece this morning, complete fiction, driven around a stream that runs where I live, and I use those inverted commas because I've never lived there. It's in my mind. But it's flowing really nicely. But I think for once it will be something that I'll keep coming back to and thinking about. I've been asked to pitch it for something, but I don't know whether I will. I might just put it out and see if it resonates with people as well, but we'll see. But the wonderful thing about fly culture for me, and Eat Sleep Fish before it, is having a background where people are able to contribute. And I get sent a lot of articles. Before I mention them, what advice would you give somebody? Because I do get a lot of messages from people saying, I would really like to write an article. What advice would you give somebody? You obviously have already about planning a piece out, but what would be your prime piece of information that you'd give somebody who's thinking about embarking on writing something?
Write it to the best of your ability and send it in. I mean, what's the worst that can happen? It won't get published, and if you don't send it in, it definitely won't get published. So, and that's preaching to myself really, because I wrote a lot for Eat Sleep Fish because it was free, it was online, and it was just an outlet for my writing, and I felt I was good enough for it. But then when you started Fly Culture, I was like, oh, well, this is, a real magazine, and this is, high caliber, and my writing's not good enough for that. And then the piece that I did send in was, so it basically had my soul bared in it, and it was just, if that wasn't going to be good enough, then nothing was going to be good enough. So it was a complete overkill now that I look back on it. But so I would say to people, don't be afraid. Just, if you try and fail, then so what? At least you tried. Don't be afraid. Go for it. Do it.
Yeah. That was a beautiful. Sorry, go on, Johannes.
No. I was just going to say that, just as a slight add-on. If you can find somebody who is published and who will give you advice and will mentor you in some way, then you've hit the jackpot. I mean, I've never had that. And any little bits of criticism that I got in my early writing, I took to heart, and I wouldn't write for, a long time. And that's just silly. If you can get criticism, it's invaluable. It's so important. So if you can find somebody who is published and who is a writer, then you're going to succeed for sure.
Yeah, great advice. And that piece you wrote, wasn't it, moved me to tears. And I'm incredibly proud. That's one of the proudest pieces I think that I've published, because it was, as I said, you laid yourself out there. There's another piece as well that I thought about. And actually, I was fishing with Duncan just a couple of days ago, and I was asking him about it because it was such a heartfelt piece of writing as yours was, that was absolutely beautiful. And I'm incredibly proud to have published your piece and Duncan's as well. I thought they were beautiful pieces of writing, and speaking from the heart resonates with people. And I think that's why it just needed nothing doing to it. It was absolutely perfect as it was. My only humble advice would be, don't use so many words. Less is more. And try and make just because you're writing an article, don't feel that it's got to have a lot of words in it. Paint the picture with as fewer brush points or strokes as you can. Sometimes that will say a whole lot more. And my other advice, as Johannes said, with Eat Sleep Fish, we ran it free. We ran it not for profit. I got nothing out of it, but it was a way for me to highlight people like Johannes and many, many others that have gone on to write a lot more and be good friends too. But if you are writing something and somebody's charging money, make sure you get paid for it. Don't give your work away for free. If someone's charging, we'll always pay for articles. I believe that creatives, if you've put, like Johannes's piece, their heart and soul into that, I want to be able to pay them for that. So, it makes it very difficult for me if stuff's being given away for free and I'm paying you for it. It puts me in a difficult position. I'm always going to support you. Don't worry about that, but think about that one a little bit. Do you have any thoughts on that front, Johannes?
It's. I suppose I'm getting. For a long time, writing was just an outlet for me to I don't know, get stuff out. And I must say, I was really. I didn't even actually expect to get paid for that article that I sent in, the very first one. I was surprised, and it was incredibly encouraging. It's it's so encouraging when somebody recognizes that this is worth something. It's an acknowledgement that you are good enough and you can do it.
Yeah, that's beautifully put, and that's how we roll with this. And we as long as we can print the magazine, we can pay people. We just keep rocking and rolling, and it seems to be working relatively well for us. So I'm very, very happy and proud to be able to do that. So you're back in Ireland now. You said the rivers, the Shannon, the trout streams aren't far away. What are your plans for this year? What have you got on? What are you thinking about? What are you going to be up to?
Oh, wow. Good question. I mean, I read this article on Arctic Run Char, or Sea Run Char. Sorry. Up in, there's actually a piece in it, wasn't there, in the latest Fly Culture, and that was up in Iceland, Greenland, I think.
Greenland.
And
yeah.
then I was thinking, all right, that looks really nice. That looks. I'm interested in that. Where's closer and cheaper? What can I actually do? And, in the latest edition of this Finnish fly fishing magazine that I get, there was an article by, I'm going to assume he's Norwegian, writer on sea run Arctic char in Norway. And he basically stumbled across them on a sea trout fishing trip. And so I've been interested in trying Norway next anyway for sea run brown trout. And so then if there is a chance to fish for sea run char, that might be something I have to try this year. But definitely, like I mentioned earlier, sea trout here in Ireland, I'm going to have to do that. We have a day at the beach planned tomorrow, so I'm going to be taking a fly rod along there, just nip away for even half an hour, try that, and fish the Shannon for pike like crazy. Just absolutely get the big ones. I've had some really nice fish already this year, and I want more. I want the really, really big one on the fly. I had one 3 centimeters in February already, and that was just oh man, those fish. His shoulders were wider than a lot of trout that we catch in the streams here. It was just a fantastic fish. So I want more of that.
Fantastic. What does a meter and a bit weigh in pounds?
Oh, good question. I actually bought a scales so that when people ask me that question, I can answer them truthfully. I don't know. Conservative estimate, 18 pounds, I think. But I don't know. I've kind of from Finland, I've gotten used to measuring fish because it's just a quick and easy way you can do it in the water even. So it's, yeah, and basically everything revolves around length there, which it doesn't tell the whole story, of course. Say a spawned out sea trout is still going to be, very long, no matter what condition it is. But then, if he's solid and pure silver, and just that's a really special fish. It's hard. It's rough to discriminate on a fish just because he's had sex or not, but it's it doesn't tell the whole story. That's all I'm saying. So
yeah.
So maybe there is a place for weight, but yeah.
Your target for the Shannon then, so would that be around the £20 mark? Is there something in your mind, and is it an untapped resource for anglers on the fly with a chasing pike?
Pike fly fishing isn't massive here at all. Pike fishing is very popular on the Shannon. With regards to a target, I suppose meter 10 centimeter pike would be nice. That would be a new personal best. So I guess you have to try and break that every time, don't you? I mean, that's not even a huge fish, something over a meter 20 centimeters, up around 30 pounds would be real nice. But that's already kind of, you have to be out there every day nearly to get those. But there's loads of low double figure pike that, especially now when the water temperatures aren't too high, they fight like crazy, and not too cold either. It's kind of like the perfect time of year for pike to show their best, in my opinion. So I landed an 8-pound fish just the last time. It took me a couple of minutes to get him in. Usually, like, you wouldn't be too it won't be too difficult to get those kind of fish in. But yeah, I was surprised. It's good.
Nice. Well, I will keep my fingers very tightly crossed for you and hope that you keep pushing through the ceiling. We've spoken for over an hour now, Johannes. So if people want to try and connect with you, do you have social media channels? Is there anything where people can find what you're up to?
Not really at the moment. I kind of keep Facebook to family and friends, and haven't been on Instagram for a few years now. I think I mentioned that in one of the articles, actually, that not at the moment, no. So if I don't know, if somebody really wants to contact me, they can contact me through you, let's say, and I can pass on details. But yeah.
That's fantastic. And I think that's very, very civilized as well. So that's good to hear. Johannes, as always, it's wonderful to catch up with you. It's wonderful to talk with you. I love your thought process and your approach to so many things that I know the listeners of the podcast are going to enjoy. So thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast today.
Thanks, Pete. It's been a pleasure.
Hey everyone, this is the end of this episode of the Fly Culture podcast. I hope you've enjoyed this one as much as me, and as ever, there'll never be any charge for these. But if you do fancy subscribing, if you fancy leaving comments or whatever, I'm told that helps people connect to our community. So if you fancy doing that, no pressure whatsoever. But in the meantime, thank you so much for listening to the Fly Culture podcast.
The Fly Culture podcast is brought to you in association with Fly Culture, a quarterly print magazine. For more information, please visit flyculturemag.com. You can also find Fly Culture on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter.